Adam Silver didn't build the WNBA on good intentions. He built it on deals, media rights, advertiser trust, and a growing, if modest, fan base have kept it afloat. So when Unrivaled launched with all the right talking points and none of the actual traction, Silver and others in the sports world took notice. Drawing just around 50,000 viewers for its national TV debut, the league didn't stumble.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
It face-planted. For comparison, high school state championships routinely beat those numbers. That scale of underperformance doesn't just suggest low interest. It calls the entire business model into question. If this is the future of women's basketball, it looks an awful lot like the past. Overlooked, underfunded, and off the radar. The WNBA's long-term survival wasn't handed to it. It was built over decades of negotiating hard-earned relevance. It thrives not because of explosive ratings, but because it understands its lane and maximizes its value within it. Unrivaled, by contrast, seems to have bet everything on hype and novelty without proving there's an untapped audience ready to support a second league. And without a clear financial engine, namely, media rights revenue driven by viewership, there's no sustainable path forward. The ratings aren't just a red flag, they're a full-stop warning. Adam Silver had been watching closely. The WNBA's commissioner had built his legacy on managing optics, strategy, and power in professional basketball. And now, a bold new women's league was being pitched as a revolution. Unrivaled wasn't just another league. It was being branded as the future. And Adam knew that if the future didn't show up on television screens, it wouldn't exist at all. The launch had all the ingredients of a media splash: flashy promos, big-name players, cross-platform marketing, even airtime on national cable networks. But when the numbers came in, the splash turned into a whisper. Just around 50,000 viewers tuned in across TNT and True TV on opening night. That number didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised alarms. These were high school game numbers, not the launch of a national league backed by big investment. Kathy Engelbert had kept her distance publicly, but behind the scenes, there was tension. The WNBA had worked for years to build media partnerships, to negotiate a $220 million annual rights deal that now formed the financial backbone of the league. Engelbert understood that success in pro sports isn't just about competition. It's about contracts, ratings, and reach. And Unrivaled's disastrous debut threatened the narrative. The comparisons started fast. Social media, sports talk, industry insiders, everyone wanted to weigh in. But Engelbert knew the numbers didn't lie. No matter how innovative the format or how promising the vision, if the audience isn't there, the league isn't sustainable. The gap between the hype and the reality was too wide to ignore. The stadium shots told the story just as clearly. Attendance was thin, energy was off, and the camera angles couldn't hide the empty seats. Despite a roster that included some recognizable WNBA players, the needle didn't move. Unrivaled had hoped its alternative format and fresh branding would disrupt the market, but instead, it exposed a harsh truth. The market might not be big enough for two women's leagues. And without viewers, there's no path to real media rights revenue. That's the model the WNBA figured out. It wasn't perfect, but worked. Those rights deals are what allow player salaries to grow. That's what justifies airtime, sponsors, and investment. Without that, Unrivaled had little more than vibes and investor money, keeping it afloat. The league's backers likely expected to build slow and grow fast. But this slow of a start is something else entirely. A 50,000 viewer debut on 2 cable networks isn't just underwhelming. It's a warning sign, especially when the WNBA, even with its own challenges, has built a relatively stable and growing viewership base. The Unrivaled model leaned heavily on the idea that women's basketball fans were being underserved, that if you built an alternative product with better visibility, fans would show up. But opening night said otherwise. The fans didn't come, and that changes the conversation entirely. Star power is the fuel of any professional league. And Unrivaled hasn't found the star that can light that fire. Paige Buchers was marketed hard, but it didn't translate to viewership. She's a talented player with major NCAA clout, but NCAA stardom doesn't always move the needle on national cable. It's not just about talent, it's about demand. The WNBA has players who've spent years building fan bases, drawing headlines, sparking debates, and creating storylines. That doesn't come overnight. And it's not just about who's on the court, it's about who can bring the casual viewer to the screen. The numbers made it clear that talent alone doesn't drive ratings. If that were the case, opening night wouldn't have fallen flat. That's what makes media rights deals so complex. Networks aren't paying for basketball, they're paying for attention. Viewership is the product. If people aren't watching, the league can't sell ad slots, can't renew contracts, can't pay players more. That's the business. Unrivaled didn't get that attention. The networks surely saw the debut figures and had questions. How do you justify future broadcasts? How do you explain low engagement with top-tier slots? For a league relying on visibility to gain legitimacy, this was the opposite of the plan. Media rights are everything. That's how the NHL, despite its own ratings fluctuations, manages massive player salaries. It's not just viewership, it's long-term deals with reliable metrics. The WNBA made it work through persistence and strategy. Unrivaled's tiny audience? That doesn't get you into boardrooms. It gets you quietly removed from programming schedules. This isn't about comparing men's and women's sports in a vacuum. It's about business. Player salaries don't come from ideology. They come from contracts. And Unrivaled hasn't even started that conversation because its ratings already closed the door. The failure didn't go unnoticed. Adam Silver made moves. According to insiders, there was pressure at the top to clarify the future of women's basketball under the NBA umbrella. And it didn't include failed experiments siphoning attention with no return. Engelbert's role was reportedly under review, not because of what she did wrong, but because someone needed to take control fast. A league like Unrivaled making this little noise with this much backing creates a vacuum. And Silver wasn't going to let that vacuum suck away progress the WNBA had fought to build. That meant leadership changes. That meant hard resets. It meant moving forward with people who understood the stakes. Sources suggested Engelbert's exit was framed as a shift, not a firing. But the writing was clear. When your competitors are flopping and your own product needs defense, leadership stability is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Engelbert's approach had been cautious and diplomatic. But this moment called for something sharper. The WNBA can't afford to split its audience, its players, or its media narrative. A rival league doing poorly doesn't help the sport. It just makes the whole space look weak. Engelbert may have stepped aside, but the message was bigger. There's only room for one dominant women's league. And if Unrivaled can't compete, it won't last. The first few weeks of Unrivaled season didn't change the trajectory. Ratings stayed flat, social media mentions dropped, and no breakout players emerged. The early momentum faded fast, replaced by a quiet acceptance that the big idea might not work. At least not like this. Investor interest may linger, but sports leagues don't live on capital alone. They live on audiences, on fans, and that wasn't there. The theory that there was a huge, untapped fan base waiting for something new didn't hold up. The numbers proved it. Viewers are already watching the WNBA, or they're not watching women's basketball at all. The awkward silence surrounding Unrivaled wasn't just about poor ratings. It was about broken assumptions. The league was built on the idea that fans wanted a faster, leaner, player-led alternative. But when the cameras started rolling and the streams went live, those fans didn't show up. The disconnect wasn't about the quality of play. It was about demand. There just wasn't enough of it to justify the infrastructure. In pro sports, startup leagues rarely get second chances. Viewers aren't patient. Investors even less so. If you can't break through the noise on day one, the odds of building momentum shrink fast. That's what Unrivaled is up against now. A spotlight that's dimming, buzz that's gone stale, and skepticism from every corner of the industry. Paige Buchers was supposed to help fix that. Her name had weight, Her college highlights had reach, and the assumption was that her fan base would follow her into this new league. But fandom doesn't always translate to viewership, especially when the platform feels unfamiliar or unofficial. The average fan doesn't jump leagues. They follow stars where the stories are told best. Even with Buchers in the lineup, the league lacked urgency. There were no rivalries to latch onto, no buzzy moments to clip and trend. And without that, even the most promising talent struggles to hold attention. The audience needed a reason to care. So far, they haven't gotten one. Behind the scenes, Kathy Engelbert had long warned that viewership isn't something you manufacture overnight. It's the result of years of marketing, exposure, and story building. The WNBA's modest but growing success didn't happen by accident. It was negotiated, fought for, and nurtured. She had the spreadsheets to prove it. Unrivaled's launch bypassed that process. It tried to fast-forward to legitimacy without laying the groundwork. Engelbert saw the risk early. You can't build a stable house on borrowed hype. Now, with the ratings public and the buzz fading, she wasn't the one answering for Unrivaled's problems. But her strategy was starting to look vindicated. Adam Silver knew the optics had to be managed quickly. Even though the NBA wasn't directly responsible for Unrivaled, the ripple effects were real. Confusion in the market, splintered fan attention, and the looming question of whether women's basketball could support more than one pro league. That conversation had consequences, especially if sponsors or networks started pulling back. The NBA had invested years into the WNBA's growth, and Silver wasn't about to let a competitor's failure undermine that. So the response wasn't just about leadership, it was about message control. The league needed to send a clear signal. One league, one direction, no distractions. The WNBA was the future. Anything else? Background noise. Inside Unrivaled, the mood reportedly shifted. Internally, execs knew the numbers weren't good, but they hoped for a turnaround. Maybe a viral highlight, a standout performance, something to generate late-stage buzz. But nothing came. Each passing game only confirmed the initial drop-off wasn't a fluke. The viewership wasn't delayed, it just wasn't there. With network slots already in place, the broadcast continued, but the pressure mounted. How do you sell advertisers on a league pulling numbers lower than reruns? How do you secure Season 2 funding when the first run barely registered? These aren't questions of faith, they're questions of math. And the math wasn't friendly. Even for players, the tension was noticeable. They believed in the mission, and many were excited about having more control over their schedules and branding. But belief doesn't pay salaries. Viewership does. And when the audience isn't watching, the entire financial ecosystem wobbles. That includes merch, social engagement, endorsements, and visibility. No one wants to admit it, but in sports, playing well is only half the job. Being watched is the other half. Buchers and others carried themselves like professionals. But professionalism doesn't erase pressure. Everyone on the court knew the spotlight was shrinking. And when the cameras fade, so do the opportunities. From the WNBA's perspective, the moment called for consolidation, not competition. Engelbert had long been clear that growth comes from scale, not splintering. Two leagues fighting for the same small audience pool was never a sustainable model. And while Unrivaled pitched itself as a compliment, the market treated it like a competitor. And that was the problem. When media buyers, sponsors, and fans look at the calendar, they choose. And when they choose WNBA, they're not choosing Unrivaled. That zero-sum effect was unavoidable. Engelbert saw it before most did. And now, she was positioned to reframe the narrative. The WNBA wasn't just the original. It was the only model that worked. The ratings report for Week 2 didn't change the story. Still low. Still stagnant. The same channels. The same drop-off. Online engagement fell too. Fewer clips shared, fewer tweets, fewer moments making noise. It wasn't just about failing to go viral. It was about failing to even spark conversation. That's the kiss of death in a content-driven sports world. If a league plays a full game and no one talks about it afterward, did it matter? That's not a philosophical question. It's a business one. And Unrivaled was starting to look like a case study and how buzz doesn't equal staying power. That's why Adam Silver acted swiftly. Leadership changes were part of it, but so were the media conversations. He knew what people were going to ask. Is there even room for two leagues? And the answer, based on every metric available, was no. Not yet. Not like this. Silver's reputation depends on results, not promises. So he pivoted the conversation back to what works. The WNBA, the partnerships already in place, the infrastructure that exists. Unrivaled, in contrast, became an afterthought. Not because the vision was flawed, but because the audience wasn't large enough to make that vision real. As the initial season of Unrivaled dragged on, the writing became harder to ignore. There weren't breakouts, there weren't heroes, and there weren't villains. There was just silence. And in sports, silence is failure. Every game played with no buzz only cemented the reality that the market had already made its choice. Unrivaled had backing, vision, even goodwill. But it didn't have fans. Not in the numbers needed to survive. And now, with that first impression locked in, climbing out of the ratings basement looked less like a challenge and more like a closed door. By now, Kathy Engelbert's hands were off the wheel, but her blueprint still shaped the conversation. Her tenure had been defined by data, ratings, revenue, reach. She spoke fluent broadcast contracts and knew exactly how networks thought. The message she had spent years delivering was finally being heard. A league without viewership is just an expensive hobby. Engelbert had warned stakeholders long before that the audience for women's basketball wasn't limitless. It was loyal but specific, and it was already committed. Her goal had never been to split the pie. It was to grow it slowly, strategically. Unrivaled's abrupt, buzz-first strategy ignored that. And now, the consequences were crystal clear. Inside Unrivaled HQ, the vibe shifted from optimism to crisis control. The buzzwords disrupt, innovate, revolutionize sounded hollow when the numbers came in. Everyone had expected some uphill climbing, but not a cliff. Each week's ratings brought tighter meetings, more calls, more urgent questions with fewer answers. The broadcast partners weren't thrilled either. True TV and TNT had carved out space, expecting at least modest engagement. But what they got was silence. No bump in traffic, no social virality, no trending moments. For networks, airtime is currency, and Unrivaled was burning it with no return. The disconnect was even clearer on the court. Paige Buchers was giving it her all. She wasn't the problem, but she couldn't be the solution either. No one player can carry a league on their back, especially when the platform around them is unstable. Fans might cheer for talent, but they show up for storylines, rivalries, personalities. That's how stars are made, not through branding packages, but through moments. Buchers had the potential to be one of those players, but the infrastructure wasn't helping her. There weren't enough eyeballs to witness her performances, and the league hadn't created compelling narratives to draw people in. Without context, even brilliance gets overlooked. Adam Silver didn't need another problem on his desk. The NBA season was underway. International markets were shifting, and media rights across all sports were entering a volatile phase. But the fallout from Unrivaled couldn't be ignored. It wasn't about meddling. It was about protecting the main product. The WNBA had built trust with its networks and investors. The NBA's own credibility was tied to that. If a rogue league stumbles too publicly, it doesn't just hurt itself. It poisons the well. Silver's swift actions weren't a personal swipe. They were a calculated firewall, a way to contain the collateral damage before it touched the WNBA. For players in Unrivaled, reality hit hard. They signed up to pioneer something different. They believed in the mission. But mission statements don't fill arenas. It was becoming clear that the league hadn't done enough to build its audience before launch. And now, the players were caught in the crossfire, stuck between their ambitions and an underperforming product. Even fans who wanted support didn't always know where or when to watch. Scheduling was inconsistent. Promotion was scattered. And without centralized attention, loyalty never had a chance to form. The fan base was too thin, too scattered, too disoriented to convert into real numbers. Unrivaled's leadership had a decision to make. keep pushing, hoping for a miracle turnaround, or face reality. With limited traction, they couldn't demand more airtime. With low ratings, they couldn't attract new sponsors. And with diminishing buzz, players would eventually weigh their options. Was it worth it to stay? Or go back to the WNBA, where at least the audience existed? The league still had investors. But funding without momentum is just a delay tactic. Eventually, everyone wants returns. If that doesn't happen, money dries up. The longer the ratings flatlined, the louder the doubts became. The narrative wasn't just slipping, it was... For Buchers, this moment was pivotal. She had the kind of visibility most young players dream of. But visibility without impact fades quickly. It wasn't just about playing well, it was about staying relevant in a landscape where highlights come and go in seconds. She needed the right stage, and Unrivaled wasn't giving it to her. Fans noticed too. Clips circulated, but they didn't trend. Interviews landed, but didn't resonate. For a player on the cusp of superstardom, this kind of league silence could stall a career. Buchers wasn't failing, but the system around her was. Meanwhile, Engelbert's successor had taken over, but her footprint remained. The media partnerships she brokered continued to deliver value. The narrative she pushed about consistency, loyalty, and measured growth was proving right. The WNBA might not dominate headlines every week, but it had built something real, something stable. As Unrivaled struggles became public, the WNBA doubled down. Clear schedules, reliable star matchups, a rising digital footprint. In contrast to Unrivaled's chaos, the W showed competence. That matters. In the sports world, confidence is currency, and the WNBA still had it. There was talk, always is, of retooling, rebranding, trying again next season. But those conversations rarely happen twice with the same money behind them. Sports fans don't wait forever. Neither do advertisers. The moment a product fails to connect, people move on. Fast. And that's what seemed to be happening. The first few games had viewers. The next few had critics. By mid-season, it was apathy. That's the real danger. Not backlash, but indifference. When no one's watching and no one's talking, there's nothing left to save. Silver's final moves were about cleanup. Behind the scenes, he reportedly worked to reassure media partners that Unrivaled's noise wouldn't bleed into WNBA coverage. Quiet efforts to clarify rights, player availability, and season alignment were all part of the containment strategy. The message was clear. The NBA and WNBA are united. Everything else? Temporary. That may sound harsh, but sports is a business. And in business, failure doesn't get sympathy. It gets absorbed or forgotten. Unrivaled had tried to shake up the game. Instead, it reminded everyone how hard it is to build something that lasts. So now it's your turn. What do you think happens next? Should Unrivaled keep pushing or call it? Is there room for a second league? Or was this always going to end like this? Drop your take in the comments. Hit that like button if you learned something new, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next drama that hits the court.